Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian, and today we have the start of a new series here on the channel. I'm calling this series Best cEDH Decks Not on the cEDH Decklist Database, probably on the DDB for short. With me today, I have an amazing guest, a personal friend, someone who's been there for the majority of my cEDH career. Welcome, Mikey.
Hey, what's up? Happy to be here. This is a list I've been working on for a while now, and it's in a spot that I'm really happy with, and I've had a lot of great success with it recently, both at Vegas and PAX and just generally online whenever I play.
Yeah, so you kind of came to Vegas, and I think with the deck had like a 70% win rate over the weekend or something ridiculous like that, right?
Yeah, and PAX it's about the same. I'd say it's even a little bit higher. Like yesterday
That's
we played
crazy.
like at least 15 games and I won like 11 of them.
That's insane. And not only like did you win with this list, but when you lent it out to me, you lent it out to Hire and a couple other people, and like everyone was like winning with it, even despite playing the deck for the first time.
Yeah, Zach from Playing with Power, he picked it up instantly.
Oh, is that
and
okay? Yeah,
He destroyed the table on it. It was
right.
amazing to watch. I was very happy for him.
Yeah, no, I remember when I played it. I think I won on a Mold of 4, and you also beat us on a Mold of 4 during one of the games too.
Yeah, the deck is just very consistent. The card quality is just very, very high, and Armix and Kraum are just two very powerful commanders that do two different things, and I think that's something that's very underlooked right now in the cEDH community.
Yeah. Right now, so we're going to switch over to the deck, and Mikey kind of buried the lead here, but yeah, we're talking about his Armix Kraum list. The name is Hatebear Driveby, which is a hilarious name.
Yeah, shout out to Riken for that. He's the one who gave me the name for that. I'm very bad at naming decks, so I rely on other people.
Hey, that's okay. Speaking of Moxfield, the place where this deck is being hosted today, this video is sponsored by Moxfield. So the amazing people over at Moxfield decided to sponsor this video. I have been a fan of theirs for a really long time. Basically, Braden showed me this site before anybody was using it, and I immediately was like, this is better than every single deck building website I've been using. And so I sought out this sponsorship because I actually believe in this website. All my decks are there. You can go to my account on there. I have literally, I don't know, dozens of lists and dozens of lists that aren't public at the current moment that I usually make public when I've done some testing, so people don't just call me an idiot for my first round of brews. But this site's awesome. Harry is fantastic. I am a patron of theirs because I believe in this website. It's a super great site. It's got so many features. Every single time I do the top 4 breakdowns and someone has like a list that is known, I always use their compare feature to be like, okay, this is what the database list has, this is what the list has for showing. And yeah, it's a great site. It has financial trackers, it has all the things like that, it has auto features. There's a feature now where you can basically like add groups of things, so people will be like add shocklands, and they'll add all the shocklands and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really cool features, a lot of really unique stuff, and it's an awesome website. And really big shout out to the people from Moxfield for sponsoring this episode. It's a fantastic site, and I'm so happy to be promoting it because I truly think this is a fantastic website.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ian on that 100%. The compare feature is just so helpful, especially when
It's
two people
so
are brewing the same. Yeah, when two people are brewing the same list, and then you can see what the differences are and talk about them. It's just so much easier than being like, "Well, I'm on this. Are you on it?" And then it just speeds things up so much.
Right, as opposed to like looking at 100 cards, scrolling down, you're like, all right, this person's on this card, but like, what are they different? And then like, I know, for example, there was a top 4 that had like 2 Najeela decks, and it was so helpful to be able to be like, okay, this is what this one had, this is what this one had, here's the side by side. Just little things like that. The compare, I could go on about the compare feature all the time. That is like one of my favorite things to use on this website.
Yeah, it's dope.
All right. Let's go on to this deck. So we have Armix and Kraum. So this is a Grixis list. And I think a lot of people, and you can agree with this because I think you get a lot of responses about this list, that people just assume when you're playing Armix, you have to be going kind of gimmicky into this discard part of the card. But in your own words, why are you playing Armix?
Armix is really just removal on the stick. Filling up your graveyard is nice because, like, obviously we're running stuff like Yogswell and Underworld Breach, but that's not the main game plan. I'm just using it to control the board.
And that's like it's less the I guess inert synergy of being like, oh, I'm gonna pitch a Citadel to reanimate it, or I'm gonna pitch a Razaketh to put it in the yard. It's more like if I occasionally throw away something that I don't mind in the graveyard, that's awesome, but it's just the fact that you have consistent removal in the command zone, right?
Yeah, 100%. I used to, the first iteration of the list, I was trying to be super cute and was on like Goblin Welder, Goblet Engineer, Trash for
Right.
Treasure. But then you're just running all these bad cards in your list, and it's
Hmm.
so rare for it to be like, okay, now Citadel's in my hand, let me pitch it, and then let me get one of these other cards that I need
Yeah.
to wait a turn to bring it back. And it was just so inefficient, and it was just not doing what I wanted it to do.
Yeah, this list really surprised me, and I think I tweeted about this during Vegas, but I said this list kind of made me rethink the Grixis color combination right now because I guess can you describe what you've I guess taken Grixis and like sort of shifted it to? And once again, you were the seek and destroy primer author for Anala, so Grixis is not something you are lacking experience in.
Yeah, exactly. So like Anal is one of my main decks, and I also have an evolution list on the database. So like
Hmm.
I'm very used to like playing like some of the more proactive combo decks. Granted, Evo is a little bit mid-rangey, but it's still fairly storm.
Right, right.
So I wanted to do a Grixis list where I'm playing all these good cards. I have the Threat of Adnaz, Necropotence, etc. But this is much more of a mid-range take on Grixis, where I'm able to control the board, get a bunch of value. My counter suite interaction package is just very, very high, so I can deal with all sorts of threats.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
I have all these bombs, so I'm able to control the table and go off when it's good for me. So this deck isn't really trying to Nas turn 2 aggressively. It's
Right.
more like hold on to the Nas, wait till you see an opening, and then go off, and you know for sure you're going to win.
Yeah, and I think people can kind of trick themselves into thinking it's more of a mid-range ad nauseum deck, which is not. I think that's an old term, and it's it's sort of a term that doesn't refer to what you're doing here. You can play a mid-range plan because you have a lot of card quality in this list. However, I wouldn't say like you're still extremely proactive. Like I've seen this deck do its thing very, very quickly, and you're still playing Dockside. You're still playing all of your fast mana. You're still playing a bunch of rituals. You have stuff like Notion Thief that you can get out really early, and Notion Wheel, and Yogswell, and Mnemonic Betrayal, and you have Culling the Week. So it's not like these options don't exist in your list. It's just more the fact that you have the ability because of the card quality in the list and because of the fact that you have removal in the command zone and card draw in the command zone to sort of play a longer game.
Exactly. It's the same approach I took to my Evo list because when Evo was first a thing when I first started playing the deck, it was a very slow, mid-range, grindy deck.
Right.
And I kept all those components the same. It's just I made it so that we also had the potential to go faster by adding spirit guides, focusing more on artifact mana. So
Right.
like I can sit there in a long mid-range Staxy game and do completely fine and not be upset. But I
Hmm.
also can threaten wins turn 2, turn 3 very consistently as well. So I like being able to pivot between those strategies depending on the pod,
Yeah.
opening hand, and such.
And one of the things I think people, so going back to the Armix discussion, I think a lot of people will see that and not really understand the power of having consistent removal in the command zone. But it is, I mean, I legitimately think this word was thrown around aggressively in Vegas. It's oppressive. Imagine playing a Malcolm deck against this deck. You literally can't ever resolve that card. Also, the amount of times I saw you attack with Armix and you're like, well, they have like, I don't know, 6 artifacts in the graveyard. So literally anything that's relevant in our format is just done. And that it wasn't hard, right? You just, if you ramp out aggressively, like a Grixis deck wants to do, you have a couple on the field, you have a couple in your graveyard because you probably wheeled at some point. Like it just happens and very easily. And even if you're only, so say you have Mana Crypt Armix, that's already, you discard a thing and that's getting -2/-2, which can hit a lot of relevant stuff in the format. As I mentioned, Malcolm, stuff like that, Dockside. You don't always want to be killing your opponent's Dockside, but in
Yeah.
those circumstances, Tim knows, very great example of that, right? Armix becomes this threat. So the decks that are really posed to attack what we're doing in the format right now, right? So the deck that like people would assume is really good against a Grixis deck, something like a Winota, like a Hatebear deck, Armix just picks those decks apart, which, if you want to go back to the name, is pretty indicative of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's so easy, and Armix is an artifact himself, so him counting himself towards the count is
Right.
just
I
so
feel like a lot of people
ridiculous.
miss that for sure the first time they see the card.
Yeah, everyone is like, you only have one, that doesn't kill my Tim. And I'm like, Armix is also an artifact. And I'm like, oh, this is a lot better than I thought. I was like, yeah, this is why I'm playing it.
Yeah, and when you have all these Grixis draw engines, when you're playing Wheel, you're playing Rhystic Study, Remora, Kraum, all of these things, you really do have cards to pitch away to Armix. Like I feel like people just assume that it's not gonna be a thing, but it really is. You're on Jewel Lotus, right? Yeah, you
Yeah,
totally
of
are.
course.
One of the things I think that happened in Commander Legends is the ability to have a turn one commander with a Jewel Lotus, or specifically a commander. I've been singing the praises of Malcolm for a long time for this very reason, but a commander that can be cast exclusively with a Jewel Lotus and has like a 3-mana impact, which I think Armix and Malcolm both do. It's a very strong place to be.
Yeah, like there's so many like this deck mulligans so smoothly compared to other lists that I play.
Yeah.
Because as long as I get a turn 1 Armix or turn 1 Kraum, I'm completely content with my situation, since Armix deals with a lot of like stacks and like the commander-centric decks or creature-based combos, because I just keep picking off like their important creatures.
Right.
Or I get Kraum out and then I start drawing cards.
Right.
And Jewel Lotus definitely enables that just even more beautifully, because it's just like, oh yeah, I have land, crypt, Jewel Lotus, get out Armix, and now I still have mana to interact or cast a wheel.
Yeah, and I like that your deck is... So I think a lot of the times what stops Grixis lists is that when like 2 stacks pieces come down, and you haven't gone greedy because you have Armix in the command zone. You haven't cut the removal. There's as you mentioned, there's a respectful amount of removal in this list, which is already awesome. You're on things like Red Blast and Psych Rift and Snap and Winds of Rebuke and Drown in the Lock. These are all pinpoint removal spells on top of the fact that you have this engine in the command zone. So I think any of those times where your opponents are like feeling pretty confident with 1 or 2 stacks pieces on the board, you can just tear that apart really without trying too hard.
Yeah, that's the name of the game here. I'm just running as much interaction as I can, and it's very hard for this deck to get overwhelmed.
I think this is very interesting because this is like a deck that I think is like 4 layers deep on the counter meta. But in a way that, because it's a proactive list, it can still do its thing, right? But it happens to be positioned really well against the things that are, quote, good against Grixis, right? So the things people go to are stacks decks. Well, you have this removal piece in the command zone. Yeah, non-land permanents are a little harder for you, or non-creature permanents are a little harder for you to get rid of, but anything creature-wise, you're going to start tearing that apart. And then what else people go to is, okay, what are the decks that break parity on the stacks decks? Things like Tatiova, right? Things like Paco and Halden that can start, or Teamer Malcolm, that can start accruing value, or a Thrasios deck underneath stacks effects. And when you can start killing Malcolms, killing Thrasioses. I remember we played a game on, I don't remember if it was on camera or not, but no, it wasn't on camera. But we played a game where I was trying to resolve Thrasios, but I kept looking down at the board and being like, there's a sort of nihilism of my casting a 4-mana Thrasios only to maybe have it hit again with Armix. So I knew I couldn't grind out my engines because it was just going to be picked away. And of course, other opponents had higher value targets, but the fear of that was acting like a stacks piece against creatures from the board.
Yeah, people get so terrified, especially about casting Malcolm and stuff, because most Malcolm decks want to get Malcolm turn 1, but now they're like, wait, do I want to pay 5 mana for Malcolm my second turn now, or my third turn? So it really does make people play really scared and very hesitant, which is just perfect for me, because then I'm able to just keep doing my thing, accruing my value, getting out value engines, and it's just really hard to deal with once I get going, and it's not hard to get going when your commander's 3 mana.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would love to, is there anything you want to talk about while we're talking about high level concepts, or do you want to go right into card selections?
We can go into card selection. I think I cover most of it. It's a grindy Grixis deck that can go fast, but we are very happy playing the long game, and we don't care about stacks very much.
Cool. All right, so we have our commanders. We have Armix and Kraum. I feel like, depending on the meta, right, I guess depends on the salt of Kraum, right, whether it's worth it for for what's happening, which is really cool because it's nice to have Kraum is good against the fast metas, right? Armix is good when, I don't even want to say in the slow metas, but when the meta tries to slow down a bit. So it's nice to have that duality in the command zone, and obviously they still have, they're still not useless in either case.
Yeah, exactly. They're just, well, like I said at the start of the video, I think having commanders that do 2 different things is just something that's so underrated right now, because most people will say blue farm is the best deck, and it's because both your commanders draw cards. But I felt like that was kind of redundant, and having removal on a stick is just so great, because now I don't have to tap out mana to remove things. I can just discard a card, and then I leave mana up for my numerous counterspell suite.
And that's another thing, right? That's one thing we haven't even mentioned, is that Armix's ability is free. Like, you use a card, but it doesn't cost mana. So you can remove a piece. It's basically like having Snap as your removal, but it's hard removal all the time, right? It's so good.
Yeah, exactly.
In that sense. It turns, imagine turning all of your cards into a free Doom Blade. That's pretty insane. And minus X is sometimes relevant depending on the situation, but that's more.
Yeah, that one hasn't come up as much, but it is like a nice effect.
Okay. So let's go into the creature suite. We got Doughty Voidwalker, Dockside, Thassa's Oracle, Simeon, and Notion Thief. It is a very small creature suite, which is something I did want to talk about when we get to some cards down below. Just the fact that you're still playing things like Diabolic Intent, you're still playing Calling Ritual, despite the fact that you have only 5 creatures.
Yeah, so I basically just wanted to play, like, I want to keep the creature suite as slim as possible, and the ones that have just the largest impact on the game. So Simeon, very good when you're trying to get extra mana off Naz's, very good for getting out early commanders, like especially Kraum. Like a lot of times turn 1 you only can make like 1 colored pip. So just being able to pitch that gets you turn 1 Kraum's more. Oracle, self-explanatory.
Yeah. Wait, people like that?
Yeah, right. And then Notion Thief, it's something that's kind of fallen out of popularity, especially when Hullbreacher came out. Like people just kind of wrote this card off, but it is still an extremely powerful effect. Like, look at all the Chimeras people are playing; they all draw cards.
Yeah.
So if I can't kill them with Armix, I can just shut them down by flashing in a Notion Thief end step. That is just really good and lets me just, like I said, accrue more advantage. I think it's an underplayed card right now. 4 mana and 2 pips is kind of rough, but when we're casting Adnaz and Peta's turn 2 very reliably, I don't see why 4 mana
it shouldn't be that
hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing with Notion Thief was when people got extremely proactive, they were never holding up mana, because even their Adnazes were never on end step, right? Like their sorcery speed turn 2 Adnazes, right? That's the kind of the meme about it, right? But when you actually have a deck that has a responsible amount of interaction like this one, where you're playing things like Drown in the Lock and Delay on top of your other stuff, I feel like it makes a lot more sense for Notion Thief to pay off more in that way, right? It's not super obvious that you're holding up a Notion Thief, whereas it would be in a more proactive Grixis list.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that catches people off guard a lot, and there'll be a lot of times where like I'll end step flash in a Notion Thief, and then on my turn just cast the wheel main phase and things like that.
Yeah, and obviously that play pattern is super powerful. There's a reason, Hullbreacher dominated the format for a really long time, and this card has been doing that for a very long time as well. Now, down with the Voidwalker specifically, I want to ask, because I've been seeing, or at least from personal experience, in more mid-rangey or even proactive Grixis lists, despite Douthie being so powerful, I found that double black has been really hard to cast. Have you experienced that?
It can be a little bit weird sometimes, but the density of artifacts in this deck just give us so much color fixing. And like our rituals, obviously, because like Darker Cabal Red exists, Calling the Weak.
Yeah, for sure.
It's never been a card that's been dead in my hand, and even the games where like I'm really struggling on double black, cool, I'll just pitch it to Armix.
Yeah,
which is
sure.
Nice.
That is pretty cool.
That's like the one fair part about this deck is like even cards that might be dead at the time, I just put them in my grave. I have so many ways to like get things back.
Yeah.
And even then, I pretty much all the decks I play, especially in Ala, I like viewing my graveyard as my second hand. So if my graveyard's huge for me pitching things, I'm A-okay with that. That just makes me have way more live draws. My tutors get even better for like a Yogg-Will or something like that. And it's just a really good place to be when you have access to your graveyard pretty reliably.
Fantastic. All right, so down to the sorcery suite, we have, I guess we'll talk about the ones of note here. So we have Wheel of Fortune and Windfall, no Time Twister, which I am a big fan of. I know I've been playing Breach decks without Time Twister many times, and I've gotten criticism for it, but I think it's when you're on Mnemonic Betrayal, Underworld Breach, Yawgmoth's Will, and your commander cares about the graveyard, like, the idea of not being on this combination seems kind of ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't run Twister in my Evo deck or my Null deck, and it's for exactly the reason you said. Breach is so great, and then when I have black, I have access to Mnemonic Betrayal and Yawgmoth's Will.
Yeah.
My graveyard's my second hand. I'm not about to shuffle it away for the slightly more consistent, when I'm down to 3 cards, I can do Land, Crypt, Wheel. I don't think that's worth it at all. Like, I'm already in a bad spot, and like, cool, that might help in these fringe scenarios, but in general, I want access to my graveyard as well as everyone else's. Like, to me, that's just not something I'm willing to give up. And that is something I get criticized for a lot too. That's actually one of the reasons this got rejected from the database. And like, why no Twister? And it's like, well, when I'm playing with my graveyard, I don't want to just give that away for free.
Right. I agree. Which is, it's an unfortunate thing because I've had to make that argument before, but it happens. Curious about Faithless Looting, because I mean you are in blue, so you have access to things like Ponder and Preordain. Why Faithless Looting making the cut here?
So I like Faithless Looting, once again, to help fuel the grave. There are times where maybe Armix is at 2 and I need to kill a 3/3, like there's a Ranger Captain on board, which is a very relevant card. that just helps me dig a little bit deeper to get my artifacts in the yard. It's also nice because if I pitch it to Armix, I still have access to that effect in my grave. Obviously, paying
Right.
3 mana for it's not great, but there are plenty of times where you resolve a main
You
phase
gotta
MC and
dig,
you just
yeah.
need to draw the card or things along those lines. So that's definitely something that could be like a flex spot. Like if you really like Ponder, for instance, I could totally see that being a Ponder. I just like this extra synergy it has with Armix, and I like being able to like discard cards to make my graveyard bigger. So that's a card that's definitely felt very good. And the fact that I can pitch it, people forget about it. It seems like I'm out of gas, and then I get to cast that from my yard.
That's pretty
and
nice.
then yeah, so it's mostly for the synergy with Armix. And I can see why some people don't like it because it's not too great of a rate when you're paying 1 to like discard 2 cards. But
So
I definitely like it
card,
here. Yeah, exactly. I definitely like it here, and the synergy with Armix is
yeah, I was gonna say that the
nice.
Armix synergy really does feel like I had a feeling that was the selling point there, but it does feel appropriate. So transmute artifact, obviously, when you have a 3-mana artifact in the command zone, that makes it pretty attractive to be able to just go grab. Spoiler alert: there's a Bolus of Citadel on this list, which cut the Goblin Welder jank and all of that, but transmuting, paying blue 3 for a Citadel doesn't seem bad at all.
Exactly, that's great, and also it helps me get some of my other important artifacts. So Grinding Station, since that goes well with Breach, and as well as Sensei's Top. Little spoiler for the enchantments, I also run counterbalance in this list.
Yep.
So just being able to get those other utility pieces is also super relevant. Like there's times where it's like he can't win. There's like no enabler for Breach because I revealed it off of Jessica as well.
Yeah.
And I'm like transmute a rock. Here's my Grinding Station. Like your move.
Seems good. Awesome. And then, as I mentioned before, Diabolic Intent. So do you feel like because of how much your commander's in the battlefield, you can still afford to play cards like this, or?
Yeah, these cards have never felt dead for me. Like I'm not going unless there's like 3 Draenus in play and I can't deal with all of them and no one else is dealing with all of them. One of my 2 commanders will be in play. Usually both my commanders are in play. So a lot of the times I'm casting Diabolic Intent and then I'm sacking either Armix or Kraum, whichever one I think is more valuable at the time. It all depends on the situation, obviously. But yeah, those cards are always pretty much sacking my commanders or a Dockside. It's not common for me to have another creature on the battlefield with this deck.
Yeah.
But I'm always casting my commanders. Even if Armix costs 5, I'm fine getting him out. There's a reason they killed him in the first place. And it just hoses so many strategies right now.
For sure.
You know, people forget commanders. We build these decks around commanders, so they're kind of important to strategies. Even if they're just draw engines, like losing access to your Tymna that you just paid 3 mana for 1 card is so good.
Yeah. I just think Armix is underestimated so much, and seeing this deck, I've seen Armix what it feels like at its real potential, and it's kind of insane. Yawgmoth's, I think, is a very smart option. I know people have led towards cutting that, and I think that's stupid.
I don't like it at all. The card was so like Breach, definitely a better card than Yawgmoth. So like I'm not gonna sit here and argue that, but like I run this in Anala too, and I get a lot of flack from it in my Anala list. But it's just like we have so many. Like just look at our card quality. Even if our graveyard's not huge, just being able to like Dark Grit, LED, get a Demonic Tutor, and now there's an Adnos on the stack, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
It's so efficient and so easy. Our graveyard gets big naturally from Armix, and plus just casting our spells. And it's just another great threat. Like in the longer games that this deck plays, like tutoring for Yawgmoth's or top decking Yawgmoth's is just a win.
So that's I wanted to bring that up because I found that one thing when I was playing against this list was you would get in this really solid position where you'd have a great amount of cards in hand and you'd say, okay, I'm going to pop off. And you may or may not get stopped, right? So when you do get stopped, I found that because you're running Mnemonic Betrayal, Yawgmoth's Will, Underworld Breach, all of these pieces, you just were able to consistently be like, all right, I'm going to try to pop off. And then your opponent would be like, no, thank you. And you'd be like, all right, next turn, Yawgmoth's Will, we're going to try this again. Like when are you going to run out of resources? And it as your opponent in that game, I remember just being like, like stop. Like there's only so many times I could stop him going off. Please help me, people.
Yeah. I like building my decks for my graves, my second hand, and the way I play Anala is the same way, where it's like I'm gonna jam Spellseeker turn 2 every game, and everyone knows that, and obviously that's not gonna win turn 2 a majority of games. But it's like, all right, cool, you stopped it once. Now I'm gonna try again the next 2 turns in a row.
I think the graveyard is so important in this format right now, and playing into it is so strong. And because the way this deck is built, I think you just have the ability to like consistently go like back to back to back, and your opponents really have a burden of pressure to be able to stop you.
Yep, exactly. And it's hard to stop me even when they try to because I run so much
It's,
interaction.
yeah,
So
right,
it's great.
right. Speaking of which, let's head over the instance, right? So like a lot of the classics we're seeing here, good still seeing Brainstorm as far as cantrips are concerned, but you know, all of the 1 mana stuff. Love that you're on Miscast and Spell Pierce and Swan Song, Fluster, Dispel, all of the 1 mana interaction, and then you're even going as far as playing things like Drown in the Lock, playing things like Snap, Fierce, Delay, Force Negation, Force of Will, and Drone Pact. Like there's just so many answers in this list, and there's a lot of diverse threats being thrown at us right now because of all the counter meta decks, because of the stacks decks, and I think having an answer for all of them is really important here.
Yeah, whenever I build any of my lists, it doesn't matter who the commanders are. I like to have a very diverse interaction suit, and
Yeah.
I get a lot of criticism from people actually that I run too much interaction in my list and not enough threats. But the
Sure.
way I see it, especially when you have black or when you have layering such as Evo or Dawnwaker,
Right.
you don't need every threat under the sun. Like I don't need Mystic Mastery, I don't need PETA and
Yeah.
all this stuff
Yeah.
because we have black tutors. I have so many ways of finding my threats. I need to be able to defend my threats, and if my threat gets stopped, I need to be able to stop the next person.
I completely agree.
So,
Yeah.
and things like Drown the Log, a lot of people hate on that card because it's like, oh, like what if their graveyard's not big? Their graveyard will be big. I'm playing Armix. I'm going to be killing things. There are times
Yeah.
where I see someone and I'm like, all right, I think they're going to start to like go for a Nas or something, and usually, you know, they're going to protect it with a 2 CMC spell or 1 CMC spell. So I'll just kill their dork. It might not be the best play in like some people's eyes, but it's like they just tutored, they have a bunch of mana. Let me kill their dork, get their graveyard a little bit bigger, and now this Drown the Lock is online. Or
Yeah.
Malcolm Timna really struggles against this list because I'm just killing Malcolm and dorks for days in that, and then
I don't see how
just
any
Drown the
Malcolm
Lock.
deck does anything against this list. As someone who's played Malcolm Rograk or Malcolm Kedis against this list.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard time. Z-Rob, he had a very rough time with this in Vegas trying to play Teamer Malcolm into
Yeah,
it. He had
yeah.
such a rough time, he switched to Paco Halden. He's like, good luck killing my dog. And I was like, well, Halden doesn't get bigger. And he's like, oh, you right.
Yeah, that's if you really want to cripple a Paco Halden deck, take out the Halden. Yeah, so there's a couple instances here, and I guess there's really 2 that I think are the only ones that I think I don't personally love in this list. I love the tight interaction suite, and I know we talked about these before. Entomb specifically, seeing as you have a single reanimation spell, which we'll talk about yet later, being Shallow Grave. But that's really your only way to get stuff back out of the graveyard in a single target sense. Obviously, we had a whole conversation about second hand, etc. But Entomb feels very specific for that. So can you explain kind of your thinking behind that one?
Yeah, so Entomb is just really nice as like another way to help set up the grave for Breach or Yawgmoth's will turns. So there'll be times where I'll just like randomly, like if I have open mana and like it's about to go to my turn and stuff, I'll just Entomb the LED. Like I never need that in my hand.
Yeah.
So then it's just in the grave, and then that helps me set up, or like Entomb or Brain Freeze. So
Yeah.
like that's more of like the cute use for it when I think it's dead. But Entomb is mostly there for big like Necropotence turns or things like that. So I'm able to get a bunch of cards off Necropotence, as everyone knows, and then the end step you're able to get priority again. So I can do things where I Entomb my Thassa's Oracle, the Exile trigger goes on the stack, and then I can cast Shallow Grave to bring it back and then win an end step. Kind of like Shimmer Mirror things. And Entomb also is just kind of another tutor for me, since like I said, I view my graveyard as my second hand. We're always trying to set up Breach. We're always playing towards the Yawgmoth's Will for the most part.
Right.
So just having that, there's been times where, like I said, people don't expect me to win because they're like, your graveyard's small, you don't have the right cards. And then I'm like, Breach on the stack. They're like, yeah, we don't care. What are you going to do? Bring back a Dark Red and like an Imp Seal? And then I just Entomb for the Brain Freeze or something along those lines. So it's just another nice extender that also has the potential to win off Necropotence or to set up an instant speed win with Shallow Grave and Thassa's Oracle. Even if I'm not off Necropotence, I can just do that and win on top of things.
Right. So my other card I was going to bring up was Shallow Grave. So it's for that line specifically to pull it off Necropotence.
It's for partially that line, but so as we know, Shallow Grave only brings back the top creature of your graveyard.
Correct.
And this goes back to why I only run 5 creatures. Simian Spirit Guide should never be in the graveyard, period, right?
Yeah.
So other than that, my hits are going to be Dockside, Dothy Voidwalker, Notion Thief, or Oracle. So Oracle, as I went over, can win.
Yeah.
Dothy Voidwalker is just super powerful because it gives it haste. So there's been times where I reanimate a Dothy in response to a wheel, and then I get like a free Adnaz, or there's a big counter war going on. Maybe I don't have a counter spell. I get my Dothy back, let a counter resolve, and then I can crack him to get a second counter to deal with whatever threat on the stack. And then also Notion Thief Wheel is another big potential, or if someone casts a Brainstorm, I can just like hose them with that. So Shallow Grave is there mostly because of my small creature suite. I will
I
admit
assume it
these
also
are
helps with dockside stuff too, right?
exactly, yeah, because Dockside ETB, I get my treasures.
Yeah, gotcha.
So I will admit Shallow Grave and Entomb are probably like two of the weaker cards in this deck. I think these interactions make it worth it. But
Gotcha.
I've been talking to Jamaican Dude about this list because he's very interested in it. And he wants to lean a little bit even more into grindy stuff. And he's like, why not just play things like Necromancy? It costs 1 more mana, but then you get your creature back for good.
And you could get anybody. Yeah.
So I definitely think this spot could be something like a Reanimate or something like that.
Yeah.
I just really like being able to win on the stack. Like, there's a reason Flash was so good when it was.
Right, yeah. There's definitely a lot to be said about that potential. And obviously the Necropotence line that you mentioned is very important too.
Exactly. So I definitely admit, like, if you're looking at this list, those would be the 2 cards I would suggest maybe running something different if you want.
Yeah.
It just really works well for my play style, and I love that I can just sandbag and win on top of something.
Yeah.
Like, it's so good for that potential.
And I think it's definitely one of those cards, those card choices where you're like, I enjoy what options this gives me, but they aren't necessary for what the deck is trying to do. So if you want to pick it up and pilot it yourself, feel free to like swap stuff around in that spot, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like,
Okay.
Jamaican Dude was talking to me. He's like, this seems weird. I was like, I agree. Like, I know this isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
And this is one of the first times him and I really agreed on deck building because we just have like pretty different philosophies for the most part.
Right.
And I was like,
yeah,
if you cut those 2 cards, like, no qualms. He's like, wow, this is a weird feeling for me.
That's like, awesome. Yeah.
He's like, yeah, like it's like I know what they're doing and I know that it's kind of cute, but it is very powerful.
Okay, cool. That's very good to know. Because that literally the same thing was my sort of qualm with the list. Moving on to the artifacts. I love your artifact suite. I do. We have the usual suspects: LED, Jeweled Lotus, Lotus Petal, Mana Grab, blah 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 blah. Top, as you mentioned, has a lot of synergy with this list. Obviously, you're playing Citadel, but it's not just for that. You're not playing boluses. You're not playing Reservoir, so you're not trying to be cute there. It's more just it turns into a 2-card combo, and when you're already playing Counterbalance, that we'll talk about in a second. It's just solid synergy, and Top doesn't like. You don't have Tymna in the command zone, right? Like, like Sensei's Divining Top in a deck with a lot of mana is a very real card, and you don't have like your card advantage isn't explicit. I've often seen you just. I feel like you always have a Rhystic Study with this deck, or something popping off. You always have some sort of card advantage engine. But Sensei's Top is actually super helpful if you're just trying to, once again, play that more responsible, hold up mana, maybe kill something with Armix, wait for something to happen. All right, I'll spin my top and end step kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's also just very powerful with Kraum since it's not like you're drawing a card every turn necessarily. So just being able to, when you get the draw triggers, to look at your top 3 and then make sure you're getting something relevant or something that's better. So it does really help smooth out Kraum drops as well. Yeah, that's been super relevant where someone thinks I'm out of interaction and I'm like, I'll spin top. And then it's like, oh, cool, I found my Fierce or my Force of Will. I'm just going to put that on top with the Kraum trigger on the stack, and then I draw it, and then we can go from there.
That's awesome. This might be my favorite Mox Opal list, specifically because you actually can get this card so consistently, given the fact that you have Armix. You're already playing 19 artifacts on top of the fact that you have Armix in the command zone. It's just like, as someone who's been cucked by Mox Opal so many times, it's just so nice to see a deck where you can actually play it appropriately.
Yeah, I feel like in this deck, it's just a better Mox Amber.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So as we mentioned, Bolts of Citadel, there's the synergies with you're playing a Grixis deck, so you can just kind of cast it within reason, like a good amount of the time. Also the Transmute Artifact stuff. With Grinding Station, which I think, great call here. I think a lot of people have been sleeping on Grinding Station in Grixis, which I don't understand, because I think that's the best place to play Grinding Station, because it's not as clunky.
Yeah, especially when you're playing things like Yogg-Will and Underworld Breach. Like, it's just great. It just helps you get there. Graveyard is your second hand. Like, that's just the name of the game right now.
Exactly,
we have so many ways to recur things. Just play into that as hard as possible.
What I loved, and I think this is when Michael Levine piloted this list when we did our deck swap in Vegas, was that he had a Grinding Station thing going on because he had a bunch of extra random artifacts, and he would just have Counterbalance out, know what the top card was, and then like grind the top of the library away, fill up the graveyard for an eventual Yawgmoth /Breach, and also clear the top for counterbalance and just like be able to reset that. And I think there was like I think that game ended up having Sensei's top, grinding station, and counterbalance out. And it was like, we're never resolving a spell.
Yeah, that was rough. And then another thing people always forget about grinding station, and I also honestly sometimes forget this, it untaps whenever an artifact comes into play, not under your control. So you can just grinding station away top. If someone plays a rock or a dockside, you can get more looks with your counterbalance by just grinding things away and such. Or
and
just
also,
setting up your grave for things.
there's a synergy of being able to play dockside when you're doing things like breach. Say you lose your brain freeze, and now suddenly every single treasure is triggering grinding station, and you'll be able to sack those and like mill your opponents out that way.
That is something that can be relevant as well. It's just such a powerful card, and it definitely is slept on in a lot of lists, I feel.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason those modern and legacy lists were playing it. Like, I think it's a very clean answer. It's easy to cast, stuff like that. Going down to your enchantments, definitely some of the most enchantments I've seen in a Grixis list. Obviously, Mystic Remora, Heuristic Study, you're playing them. Breach, duh. We talked about counterbalance a lot. You and I are hype on the counterbalance train, right?
Yeah, I love it when you have a way to constantly reset the top of your deck. So obviously counterbalance top is powerful, but access to Kraum is what makes this card so powerful. The fact that your top card's constantly changing and you can stack your triggers to where it's like draw Kraum, then flip counterbalance, or flip counterbalance, then draw if someone forgot what was on top, or you maybe cast a vamp tutor. That happens a lot, where I'll vamp tutor for something, and then they don't know what it is, but I know, and it's like, all right, twos are pretty powerful, Oracle, Witchclaw, Demonic Tutor, Breach, and then I'll just flip that on like the Mad Farm person's turn. I did that a lot to Hal this weekend, which was fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, when Gustav first sold me on counterbalance, so a lot of my hype and respect for this card is because of Gustav's Kraum Citadel list.
I agree. That's where I saw, because I thought the card wasn't great, because I tried it before, and then with Kraum I was like, oh, okay, that's what it needed. That's literally what it needed.
I'm already hype on the card, and I think it's really good, especially if you're in like the tier 1 con style metas, the Danish very proactive meta, or the Swedish meta. Like, all of those metas are great for counterbalance because you're shutting that stuff off. You're seeing a lot of Cody stuff like that. It's good there. But in other metas, having access to something like Kraum it's wild how oppressive Kraum, counterbalance, and any sort of deck manipulation is. It's crazy. Necropotence actually also is very cute with counterbalance as well. Because it doesn't matter when you exile the card, you still can exile cards Necropotence.
Yep, that's another just zany interaction that is super great.
Yep. So Necro, I do want to talk about, because I've been struggling a lot with Necropotence lately in the inclusion spot. But once again, you have Necro lines to win at instant speed, which is fantastic. But also, I think that because, as I said, I think the way your list is sort of built, the ability to play Necro and then go pretty, because I assume you go pretty deep with it, right?
Yeah, it all depends on the game.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go pretty deep with it. I don't run Final Fortune. So I think, like, for instance, if you were playing this deck, an easy swap would be take out Entomb or Shallow Grave for Final Fortune if you were interested in doing that type of thing.
Sure.
I just like Necropotence just because it's one of those cards. I'm with you. Like, I've been pretty soft on this card recently, but it's still so good. Just the ability to, like, draw 10 cards. Like, I don't always go super deep. It'll just be like, let me refill because I'm out of things from pitching to Armix or countering stuff. Like, you see me at tables. Like, I'm the one always with the answer. Like, that's kind of what I've become known for in the cEDH community, because I always run so much interaction. So it's just nice to be able to refill and try again and things along those lines. I do agree the card does not feel as powerful as it used to, but it's just too good, to my opinion, not to run, right? Like, it has to be good. It draws cards. Like,
and as we mentioned, Kraum's a shaky card advantage engine at best, right? So there's something to be said about not relying on that.
Yeah, I will say it's very rare I am tutoring for Necropotence or something. It's more of like something later in the game, I happen to draw it and I'll cast it. But it's not something I actively search for in this deck by any means.
It's a big refill, but it's not necessary. And you're playing one of my favorite cards of the year, Dress Down.
Ever since this card was leaked, I was like, this is going in every blue list I've ever played in my life. It is so powerful.
It's
the fact that it has flash. It replaces itself, and it's hard to deal with because it's an enchantment. Most interaction people are running only hits instant and sorceries, other than Swan Song and like the generic counters. But
every time I see someone with a dispel or a miscast and they're like trying to counter a breach or this card, I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, what? You know what I mean?
The card is just so powerful. It stops so many of the relevant combos in this deck and in this meta. So like, it hoses any creature-based strategy, obviously, and it also, everyone's running Dockside, everyone's running Oracle, and this is an answer to that. Like, It's just too good.
And it also is extremely powerful into, as I mentioned, like a deck like Winota, right? Like if you were the fact that you can, and I got blown out by this by Gustav one time, turn right before his end step, flash and dress down, because that's how this card works, and you can end step lock it basically till your end step, dress down. All the stacks pieces were gone, literally all of them, because I had some and my opponents had some. All of them were useless immediately, and then just boom, Underworld Breach, game over. Like, Dress Down is so silly.
I will say, Dress Down is. I've had a pretty big influence on Gustav's Kraum list, and Dress Down is one of those cards that I was like, you need to be running this. It's just so good. And all these stacksy boards people are complaining about, it's like you don't need to run like some crappy 5 mana sorcerer speed removal, Winds of Abandon. You can just flash in a Dress Down.
Hey, listen, sometimes people are playing creatures, okay? But yeah, so that goes back to our conversation about the fact that you're running 5 creatures, right? Like that is when you're playing 5 creatures on top of your commanders, Dress Down will way more often be something in your favor. And also, you're literally never casting a Simian Interior Guide. So you're playing basically 4 creatures apart from your commander, and you can win without creatures, right? Like it's not like the only win cons are Thassa's Oracle, the only win cons are Oxide Loops. You can win with breach shit and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. The one thing I want to talk about the lands, you're down to 27. It's pretty ballsy.
This is the number I found works for me. I use this in all my lists, like even Evolution. Like some people call me crazy.
Yeah.
But for 27 lands, like it's just worked. I don't feel like it really impacts my land drops, especially because most of my lists I run a ton of artifacts, and we also have Darkside, we have rituals.
Yep.
Honestly, the game it's very rare for me to get mana screwed. The games that I actually remember where I lose is where I get flooded, which is hilarious, right? Like, and also when you really look at the stats of it, I know some people say this isn't the best argument, but like the difference between 29 and 27 lands is like a fraction of a percent that you're going to draw a land different. So like that's what I lean into, and I know it might not be the best reasoning, and cEDH just lacks data in general for like what the magic number is. But for sure. This number works for me, and it lets me have more room for interaction. And people complain I have too much interaction, then they play against me and they get upset that they can't cast spells. So
it's so clean, and I love that you're on City of Traders too, because I think it's so good with your commanders, given the fact that they have 2 colorless or 3 colorless pips respectively.
Exactly. Like I pretty much, like I said, this deck molds so beautifully because it's just like, do I get turn 1 Kraum or turn 1 Armix? Because that's generally good enough for me to want to keep it. It has to be like completely trash for me not to keep a hand that just gets a turn 1 of one of them.
Yeah. This deck's awesome. I'm very excited to have talked about it here. This is going to be sort of a high level breakdown of it. I don't know that we're going to go into mulligans with it, just because I don't know how instructive that will be.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be too worth it. Like it's just I play good cards.
It is a grixis list at the end of the day, right? Like it is you're playing your Adnals, trying to get out fast, and or saying early Armix, take out the board. And it's very conditional, I've noticed. You really have to play to your pods.
Really play to the pods, really play to the mulligans people are doing, board states, all that kind of jazz. It's definitely a deck that requires a lot of thinking, but it's not really any intricate combos or lines that you need to learn. It's all just basic, easy A+Bs, and it's just knowing when to go off and like when you should go fast versus when you should slow down and just start picking creatures off.
Sweet. All right, so Hatebear Driveby, our first deck tech on best decks in cEDH that aren't on the database. Thank you so much for coming on, Mikey. I'm so happy to have done this. I'm so happy to finally have you on this channel.
Yeah, it was awesome. I love talking about this deck. I'm glad that it's starting to gain a little bit of traction, especially after Vegas. A lot of people have been asking me and picking it up. And also, I'm very excited because Jamaican Dude's going to pick up this list soon. And like I mentioned, he wants to make it a little bit even more grindy. So I'm very curious to see what his interaction or his iteration will look like. And I just hope that this archetype can build, because I think Armix is slept on and the card is just bonkers right now. I think there was only so many times that all of us could get bitch slapped around by this deck until people started to notice, because we got slapped around hard. This is the deck performed so well this weekend, or during Vegas, and apparently this weekend as well. And it's not like if you were playing with the same people, if some people were piloting your deck, like it was so consistently performing through the hands of multiple pilots, playing against a diversity of pods.
it was just so impressive to watch perform. And as I said, it made me rethink a number of things that I've been working on in the Grixis space. So very excited to be talking about this deck, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a fun deck, easy to pick up. It's all really just about threat assessment, knowing when to interact, when not to.
Yeah, for sure.
So like that those are the skills you need for this deck. It's not that tricky to pilot. It's mostly just playing to your pod, knowing what's important, what's not. And
the threat assessment payoff when you have removal in the command zone is huge. It is such a huge benefit. So I think that's something that, like, if you think you're a good player, if you think you know what to answer and when to sandbag and when to go for it, I think this is a deck that pays off hard. I think decks like Evolution do that. I think decks like Dawnwaker Thrasios do that. There's a lot of those decks where if you know the right time to go for it, you know the right time to pivot to play controlling. This is one of those decks that really pays off pilot skill.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, Mikey. Thank you so much for joining me. To everybody at home, thank you for enjoying this deck tech. If you know of any decks out there right now that you guys want to be on this series, that you're like, this deck is insane, I have no idea why there isn't a version of this in the DDB, I would love to hear about those in the comments down below. There's so many things like that where people just maybe haven't got the opportunity, don't really care for the DDB for whatever personal reasons, stuff like that. This isn't any sort of movement against them. This is more just a series of, I want to highlight stuff that doesn't have the opportunity to be highlighted. Decks in the database do get highlighted. Both Mikey and I have lists on there. This is just, I saw this list absolutely body people over like 20, 30 games, and it's not on the DDB, and I wanted to highlight it because it's a really cool deck, and I really like talking about it. So if you guys know any lists like that, please throw them down in the comments below. I would love to hear about them. Obviously, put the full deck list, and hopefully it's linked to a Moxfield list. And stuff like that. So please, throw that stuff in the comment below. If you guys like this series, feel free to tell me if you think I'm a heretic and should be burned for my clear move against the DDB. I guess throw that in the comments below as well.
Oh boy, it's gonna get juicy.
Yeah, it's gonna get juicy. No, as many people know, I have a lot of respect for that, for the database. I have a lot of respect for people on it. And I just want to be clear that this is not any sort of statement against them. This is more a positive thing, getting to highlight stuff that has not yet been highlighted. So, Mikey, thank you so much. Everybody out there, have an amazing night. Have an amazing week. Peace.